Welcome back to the deep dive. We've gone through your stack of articles, your research notes, all those historical documents, and we are ready to turn it all into some deep, instant expertise for you.
Today, we are getting into a really radical piece of history. We're looking at the moments right after the official end of slavery in Jamaica. You know, the date we always hear is 1838, full emancipation.
Right.
But what we've uncovered in these sources, well, it shows that for thousands of people, the real fight for independence, for self-determination, it started years earlier. And it started under a system that was freedom in name only.
That's such a good way to put it. And our mission today is to analyze the fierce, really ingenious response to that flawed freedom. We're talking about the Free Village movement.
Exactly.
We have sources here detailing two very unique, almost opposing settlements that were founded in the exact same year, 1835. It feels like a real fork-in-the-road moment for Jamaica.
It absolutely was. We'll start by digging into the prototype for real autonomy, a village called Sligoville. And then we're going to place it in stark contrast with a completely separate colonial effort that was launched at the same time, Seaford Town.
And understanding that duality is just so essential to grasping the competing visions for what post-emancipation Jamaica could even be.
This is a story of people who were formerly enslaved, not, waiting around for permission. They were actively taking control, building these thriving independent communities from practically nothing. And this was despite the worst efforts of the colonial establishment and the old plantation system.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the state of affairs, say, between 1835 and 1838. What did life actually look like under this apprenticeship challenge?
Well, what the historical record reveals is that the abolition of slavery in 1834, it came with this massive asterisk. The system they brought in to replace it was called the Apprenticeship System.
Right.
The planters argued that, well, they needed a transition period to adjust their labor models.
Transition. Okay.
But in practice, the sources just show this was a mechanism designed purely to retain control.
So it was less a phase out of slavery and more of an institutionalized delay of actual freedom.
Precisely. Under the terms, the formerly enslaved population, who were then known as apprentices, they were still bound to their former enslavers. They were legally required to provide 40.5 hours of unpaid labor every week.
Wait, 40.5 hours? Unpaid? That's basically a full-time job.
It was. If you're working that much for free, you have almost no opportunity to earn your own wages or build any kind of economic life for yourself. The whole system was just structured to keep the planters in control of labor and to keep wages suppressed.
So you're legally free, but you still lack the most fundamental parts of economic liberty. No land, no resources, not even your own time.
Exactly. And that economic and social confinement, it just must have created this immediate, urgent pressure to find an escape.
Of course. If freedom doesn't mean you control your own property and your own time, then you have to invent your own path to freedom.
That's it. The source material really emphasizes that this crisis of quasi-freedom, it created a perfect storm for radical action. They needed alternatives. They needed a real sanctuary from the plantation economy. They needed property.
And this brings us right to Sligoville, a truly revolutionary place established in 1835. I think the fact that this predates full official emancipation by 3 years is it's an astonishing sign of determination.
It really was. Sligoville is celebrated as the first free village, and its foundation story is one of defiant purpose. It was established by a Baptist missionary, James Mursell Phillippo.
And he saw the system for what it was.
He did. He recognized that the apprenticeship system would never deliver true freedom, so he knew the key was property.
So what was the first step? How do you even begin to move from the plantation to independence?
Phillippo went out and bought 25 acres of land deep in the interior of St. Catherine. His explicit goal was to create a completely self-sufficient settlement for the apprentices, a physical sanctuary where the laws of the plantation just didn't apply.
And the sources paint Sligoville as more than just a refuge. It sounds like it was the actual blueprint for self-governance, a very calculated economic structure.
That's right. The land wasn't just given away. It was purchased, and then it was carefully divided. Phillippo set up a system where plots were small enough for a family home, but big enough for cultivation, usually around 1 to 2 acres.
So that immediately creates the foundation for an independent peasant economy.
Instantly. It completely decoupled the community from the demands of the sugar estate.
You mentioned the centrality of institutions earlier, and the sources really stress that in Sligoville, the church and the school weren't afterthoughts. They were foundational.
Yes, they served a dual purpose. They provided religious instruction, of course, but they were also the infrastructure for civic life, for social stability, and most importantly, for education.
Skills they had been actively denied under slavery.
Exactly. These institutions were providing literacy, numeracy, leadership skills, all the tools you need to manage independent property and build a functioning civil society. I mean, it was nation building on a micro scale.
Did the sources say how the residents even managed to buy the land? I mean, they're still obligated to their apprenticeships. The planters couldn't have made it easy.
No, the documents show it was incredibly difficult. The funds often came from, collective savings that were organized through the church, and sometimes from direct aid from missionaries like Phillippo who bought the land wholesale.
Wow.
So the ability to purchase even a small plot represented a tremendous sacrifice. It often meant extra work outside those required 40.5 unpaid hours or selling personal items. And the planters, of course, they absolutely hated it. They saw Sligoville as a direct drain on their labor supply.
I also find the political symbolism here fascinating. The village was named after the governor at the time, How Peter Brown, the second Marquess of Sligo.
A very strategic move.
Right, naming your anti-plantation settlement after a political ally.
It was an intelligent recognition that they needed some level of political cover. Governor Sligo, who served from 1834 to 1836, was known for trying to expose the brutality of the apprenticeship system. So his name lent a certain legitimacy and protection to the new village.
And Sligoville's success was immediate. It was undeniable. It proved right away that the planters' central argument, that formerly enslaved people wouldn't work without being forced, was a complete lie.
It set a powerful precedent for self-governance. It forced the hand of the colonial administration and the planters, demonstrating that people would work and work hard when the fruits of that labor belonged to them.
Okay, so Sligoville, 1835, is this ultimate act of self-determination, built from the bottom up. But here's the narrative twist from our source material. At the exact same time, in the same year, another community was founded, Seaford Town, and it had a completely opposite top-down purpose.
And this contrast is just crucial for understanding the colonial mindset. If Sligoville was a declaration of Black economic independence,
Seaford Town was the government's counter-strategy.
exactly. It was established under the bountied European immigration policy, which was formalized in 1835.
So what was the calculus there? Why bring in European settlers just as the formerly enslaved population is finally fighting for its own land?
The sources reveal a pretty clear twofold goal. First, yes, it was to supplement the labor force because the planters were terrified of a mass exodus from the estates. But the second and perhaps more pointed goal was geopolitical. They wanted to populate Jamaica's interior with European settlers to maintain colonial control.
To stabilize the colony.
That's the word they used in the documents, stabilize.
And by stabilizing, they really meant diluting the political and social influence of the increasingly independent, free Black population.
Precisely. Seaford Town was a dedicated German settlement located in Westmoreland. The land itself was donated by Lord Seaford, Charles Ellis, 500 acres of his Montpelier estate.
And this land was specifically for German indentured laborers and settlers, not for the Jamaican apprentices seeking their own freedom. This policy just seems inherently flawed. I mean, were these European settlers actually prepared for the realities of tropical farming in the 1830s?
Not at all. And the documentation of their struggles is such a striking contrast to the fierce determination we see in Sligoville. The German settlers faced severe challenges. They were just, largely unprepared for the climate.
Right.
The sources mention widespread disease, fever was rampant, and just general economic hardship.
Was there any kind of community support system, like the one the missionaries built in Sligoville?
Not in the same way, not initially. The settlement faced isolation and really insufficient colonial support. This led to some abandoning the town completely or moving to more established urban areas. It was not the immediate success the colonial administration had hoped for.
But despite those struggles, the cultural legacy of Seaford Town is still there, which is fascinating.
It is. The ones who stayed, they adapted. They preserved distinct aspects of their German heritage, which you can see today in surnames in that area. Surnames like Zink, Stoltz, Hufle. And critically, they also contributed European farming techniques and unique architecture. The sources specifically note that they built homes with basements, which is a feature almost unheard of in traditional Jamaican architecture,
To escape the heat.
to escape the tropical heat.
So if we step back and look at the whole picture, you had these two settlements, both born in 1835, and they're a perfect snapshot of Jamaica's future being pulled in two totally different directions.
Absolutely. Sligoville was built by freed people, for freed people, tied directly to the emancipation struggle. It was aiming for economic separation from the plantation. Seaford Town was a colonial initiative aimed at economic stabilization and demographic manipulation, trying to reinforce the existing social hierarchy.
And the choice between those two visions really defined the next century of Jamaican development.
It did.
So the success of Sligoville was the catalyst. It showed what was possible. How did that initial spark lead to the widespread free village movement?
Well, Sligoville didn't stay isolated for long. Its model was replicated almost immediately. It inspired this widespread movement led primarily by missionaries, Baptist, Methodist, Moravian, who all recognized that land ownership was the only sustainable path to self-determination.
And we see other major villages follow pretty quickly. Sturgetown in 1839, Buxton in 1840. This entire movement becomes the foundational architecture for post-emancipation society.
And here is where the concept of land ownership becomes truly transformative.
This is the crux of the whole deep dive.
It is. The act of requiring villagers to purchase land, sometimes through collective saving, sometimes through payment plans facilitated by missionaries like Joseph Sturge, it replaced a lifetime of forced dependency with the ultimate symbol of independence: property rights.
So how did this shift away from the planter economy actually work on a practical level? What were these new peasant farmers growing?
The sources show a really fundamental economic shift. Instead of focusing just on monocrops like sugar, which was the backbone of the plantation system, villagers cultivated these small plots called provision grounds. Okay. And they grew essential food crops like yam, cassava, breadfruit, plantains. This ensured immediate food security for their families.
Self-sufficiency first.
Exactly. But they also engaged in the wider market. They cultivated cash crops like coffee, pimento, ginger. This peasant farming economy drastically diversified Jamaica's agricultural output. And critically, it reduced their reliance on plantation labor and the wages, or lack thereof, that the estates offered.
It let them control the pricing and sale of their own goods.
It put them in control.
Now, we mentioned planter opposition, but let's get into the specifics because they must have seen this economic rebellion as an existential threat. What kind of tactics did they use to try and crush the free village movement?
The resistance was intense. It was organized and it was multifaceted. Planters were furious. They were expecting a docile, readily available, low-wage workforce.
And the free villages took that away.
Stole it away. So they employed economic pressure, legal manipulation, and just outright intimidation.
Okay, give us some tangible examples from the sources. What were their maneuvers?
Economically, planters actively restricted land sales. They'd refuse to sell land in small, affordable plots. They'd often demand that large, undivided tracts be purchased at these exorbitant prices, knowing that freed people couldn't afford them individually. This forced the missionaries to act as middlemen.
So they weren't refusing to sell land outright, but they were price gauging and manipulating the unit size to basically prevent access.
That was one strategy. They also controlled market access and trade networks. They'd try to suppress the prices paid for peasant crops to maintain their own economic dominance.
And legally,
they lobbied the colonial government to impose high taxes on small landholdings or to introduce prohibitive licensing fees for local trade. Anything to make it harder.
And what about direct conflict,
Yeah.
physical threats?
The documents describe various acts of coercion and violence. Freed villagers who established homes would face threats, occasional attacks. There are records of arson of their crops or newly built homes being burned by planters or their hired enforcers. It was a sustained, concerted effort to undermine their independence and force them back onto the estates.
But despite that, the movement not only survived, it flourished. It's so important to recap the champions of this movement.
We have to remember the dedication of James Phillippo, the founder of Sligoville. Then you have Joseph Sturge and Thomas Fowell Buxton, the British abolitionists whose financial and political backing was crucial, and even Governor Sligo, who offered that critical early political endorsement.
But the ultimate victory belongs to the residents.
Absolutely. The formerly enslaved people who endured all these economic hurdles and physical threats just to secure their own land.
So what does all this mean for the history of Jamaica? Let's synthesize the true legacy of the Free Village movement.
It was a successful, radical, and immediate response to the institutional failure of the apprenticeship system. By taking the concept of freedom and giving it a physical economic form through land ownership, these communities provided a clear, lasting path to self-reliance.
And it strengthened the social and political identity of Black Jamaicans, which had been systematically dismantled by slavery.
Yes, and you mentioned it laid the permanent foundation for the modern Jamaican economy. One rooted in small-scale, diversified, self-directed agriculture rather than dependence on foreign markets or old planter interests.
Most critically, the movement sounds like it was a school for democracy and resistance.
It was the act of organizing, of buying land collectively, building churches and schools, managing local affairs. It fostered this deep sense of self-governance and communal leadership. And that spirit influenced later struggles for civil and political rights well into the 20th century.
This whole deep dive is just a powerful testament to the idea that true liberation is fundamentally tied to economic control. If you don't control your land and your time, you really don't control your destiny.
The Free Village movement was the moment that destiny shifted.
And here is our final provocative thought for you to carry forward. Consider the power of an idea that survives a systemic attack. The free villages were founded under immense duress, in open defiance of powerful planters, starting with Sligoville in 1835. Many of those original villages established in the 1830s still exist today. Reflect on that enduring legacy of property ownership as not just an asset, but as the ultimate lasting measure of true freedom.
A symbol of independence that continues to resonate today.
Thank you for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.